Hello, and welcome to a very special 8-minute demo video series. Today, we're going through a video tutorial on OIS 6.3 Advanced Workflow Design and Best Practice Video Shorts. Yep, these are going to be smaller videos on specific topics. And the topic we're going to talk about right now is making everything dynamic. This one's all about making everything dynamic, and I'm going to give you some examples live here, and then I'm going to reference one of the examples that I've provided up on the blog post already that is almost all dynamic in all the appropriate places. Now, this is a best practice that I use all the time, so any of the workflows that you see that I've made available or I blog about, unless they're just silly dummy examples, should have most everything dynamic, nothing static or hard-coded. So to start this out, I have two policies, nothing in them right now, 1A and 1B for making everything dynamic example. And what I'm going to do here is, this is going to be the master policy and this will be the child policy. So I'm going to create a custom start object. And if you're not familiar with my example by now, well, you probably haven't been watching. So I'm going to do my standard. And in here, obviously, I don't have to add parameters here, but I like to because as opposed to hard coding localhost or another computer in my domain, I can make that dynamic. I don't want to hard code the command dir because I may want to run an ipconfig or something more significant, xcopy or anything like that. And I certainly don't want to hard code the folder that it's going to be working in. So I'm going to hit cancel there. I'm going to go ahead and create my three parameters. I'm going to just hit finish there. And then I'm just going to reference those three as they were created. Parameter 1, parameter 2, and parameter 3. Now, part of making everything dynamic, you got to keep in mind, people aren't going to know what parameter 1, 2, and 3 are, especially if they go to initiate this from the operator console, or any other method for that matter. So it's best to label them. So while you can make things dynamic, you want to make sure you're naming everything appropriately. So when you kick this off from one of the various external interfaces, that you know what you're doing, and the other people you're sharing these policies with will know what they're doing. So it's easy enough to change. Computer, command, and our favorite working folder here. Now if we hit finish, because everything is referenced by GUID, we see computer, command, and working folder are displayed as we would expect. Alright, and then of course send platform event. We're just going to choose information. We can't make anything dynamic in there, but we could make some dynamic choices for the summary and the details. So we could subscribe to published data and say in the common published data and go object name status equals object status. More dynamic than that, I guess I could create a variable for that, but it really doesn't make sense, and we'll get into usage of variables in a second. And then details. Usually I choose pure output. Finish. Now this policy, even though it's 3 objects long, is as dynamic as I can make it at this point where it makes sense. Like I said, it's probably no sense making that dynamic because it's just part of a message or a notification. But we can check this in, and then from here we usually, from a parent policy, we'll trigger a child policy. So we're going to go grab that trigger object and identify the policy. There it is. And now we certainly could hard code everything here, but that's not going to make sense. So we want to pull that from some other location, like a file. So I will show you that in a second. So I'm just going to hit finish here to save that policy identification. And then I'm going to go and create a file real quick. And in here, I'm going to do something simple like computer, which will be localhost, semicolon, the command dir, semicolon, c colon backslash, and then maybe cjdemo-dpm, semicolon, ipconfig, semicolon, and we don't need anything after that, and then maybe cjdemo-dc, semicolon, who am I? Obviously don't need anything after that. So I'll just save this. Then we're going to read that in. And this is where you might want to start using variables. So instead of typing the file name in there, I could do a variable. Here, though, is a choice, so I'm just going to leave it ASCII. And then line numbers, I'm just going to 1-end. But that's a pretty static value, so I'm going to make that a variable as well. But so I can have an easy copy paste at it, I'm going to go ahead and choose from the location, commands, and then I can copy this, finish, and then I already created a folder down here, new variable. This is going to be command file, and then we do want another variable for 1-end, and this will be all lines. And we go back to our folder and we'll reference those. So we'll remove the static text. That's the command file. And instead of line numbers, we want all lines. We'll hit finish. And now we'll reference in the trigger policy those 3 bits of data. So first, we're going to expand. And because we're going to need because we're pulling information and we're going to have to parse out the fields, we're going to use the field function. Field functions and all the other functions are described in the data manipulation best practice guide, a video that's also available. Field, which published data we want, line text, comma, what's the delimiter, semicolon, and then what field number for the command, which was 2. And now I don't have to do it again. I could just copy that, paste this, it's 1, and then paste as 3. Okay, finish. And then this is as dynamic as it possibly can get at this point, within reason, as I said. And now, if we're able to trigger this, let's just start this guy up and trigger the policy 3 times. So we should see, okay, all 3 are done. And if we take a look, we see run program equals success for each of them. But let's take a look what they did. Well, there's the dir, there's the ipconfig, and there's the who am I. And they each were executed on different machines based on the information that was dynamically passed in. Keep in mind, blue text means dynamic. Essentially, that's what you can do and make everything dynamic. You can put things that aren't going to change very often, like files or the indication of what the line numbers are to read, into variables and reference those. And then obviously you should be very familiar with published data and how to parse it. And in this way you can make everything dynamic. There's one other location, and I do want to show you this, and I'll just create a new policy real quick. And that's with objects like the database object, where while the query is not going to be always the same, the connection information is most often the same, and this is perfect candidate for variables. So I'm going to go and create a couple. One for the server and then one for the database name. And then we go back here to our example. And then in the connection, we identify the variable for server and DB name. And now we could simply do a select from that appropriate database, and we'll just run it. And of course, we get values back as expected. And if you remember from the global settings, you could see what the variables actually are over here. And then if I wanted to maybe reuse this, the connection, I just have to copy and paste the object itself, and then the connection information is the same. And this is good because if you have to ever change the name of the SQL Server or change the name of the DB, you do it once. So if I wanted to change the name of the DB for these 2 objects, I can simply go to make everything dynamic down here and change it to, now obviously I would need to change the query, but that's not a big deal. We'll just flatten both of these so we don't get multi-value data, which is covered in the handling multi-value data topic. We'll hit test and you'll see the change. Alright, we're going to step over. Oh, and before we continue, you can see the variable has changed, and I didn't have to change anything with those variable identifications in the objects themselves. So you can see that, and everything's working as there's the results concatenated or flattened, and then we'll see the other results here for priority, same thing. So And there you have it. There's probably one more example I can show, which I did sort of show in the error handling, but I'll create another policy. And this is basically creating a notification hub or error handler as I created before, where we have custom start and then maybe just an email object where we create some parameters like subject and recipients and body. So all we have to do is identify those in here: subject, recipients, and body. And then in here, the data will be passed through, and we can use this as a generic email handler. So if we go back to our master policy, pull out another trigger policy object. Now I can dynamically pass in the body of the message, the subject, and recipients based on a combination of published data, variables, specific notes from files, and things like that. So, for example, I could, in the body of the message, publish the information from the read line. Obviously, I'd want to flatten that and not send five emails, but that's besides the point. You can send the information generically to a trigger object, and then that email will be sent based on the information that's passed through. It's a perfect example of making everything dynamic. And with that, I think that I've covered most of the bases with making everything dynamic. If you want to see another example, take a look at the orchestrated cloud deployment example, because I make use of variables very heavily. You can see all the variables are set. Everything blue is dynamic, and then I just have the actual parameters as hard-coded, but I could have made those variables too. So if you want more information about that or my usage there, plus an example workflow, you can take a look at my orchestrated cloud deployment video and blog post there. But other than that, I think we're covered on making everything dynamic. We certainly appreciate you watching. Thank you.